Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling cases in Henderson County, Kentucky's documented history. Please let me know where you're watching from and when you first heard this story in the comments section before we start. We want to know where these recorded accounts come from and what time of day or night they arrive. Before being abandoned in the winter of 1893, the Sutherland family estate proudly stood on the outskirts of Henderson County, Kentucky for almost 70 years. 3 generations of Sutherlands, a family whose wealth originated from coal mining operations that sprawled beneath the undulating hills of western Kentucky, had lived in the enormous house with its odd asymmetrical wings and exceptionally deep well. Though few outside the surrounding area would ever hear of it, what transpired in December of that year would turn out to be one of the most puzzling and unsettling events in the county's history. If county records hadn't been found during a 1962 courthouse remodeling, the incident could have been completely forgotten. Even the most experienced historical crime investigators would be troubled by what those documents disclosed about the Sutherland brothers and their family. On the 18th of December, 1893, Ezekiel and Thaddeus Sutherland, twin brothers who were 37 years old, were reported missing by Ezekiel's wife, Elizabeth Sutherland. According to Henderson County Gazette archives, the brothers had been last seen 3 days earlier carrying surveying equipment toward the Ohio River, according to the original report. With the exception of one odd detail mentioned by Sheriff William Holloway in his first report, Sutherland appeared most concerned about whether we would need to inspect the family well, repeating several times that it had been sealed shut on account of contamination and should not be disturbed under any circumstances. This would have been unremarkable. The brothers frequently surveyed potential mining sites along the river. Although the Sutherland family had long since stopped farming, the home was situated on about 60 acres of excellent farmland in Kentucky. Located at the highest point of the land, the main house had views of the Ohio River from a distance of about 2 miles. A carriage house, a tiny caretaker's cottage, and the infamous well, a peculiarly deep and wide construction, constructed in 1824 by the patriarch of the family, Thomas Sutherland, were located behind the home. According to historical records, Thomas had insisted on excavating much deeper than was necessary because he wanted to reach the purest waters of Kentucky. However, local mythology claims that what he found was something very different. Thomas Sutherland, a wealthy man whose origins in Pennsylvania were still a mystery, had come to Kentucky in 1818. According to county records, he bought the land using gold instead of cash, which was uncommon at the period. He then started working to become a mainstay of the expanding town. After the discovery of significant resources on his property in 1826, a fortuitous event that tripled his wealth in 10 years, he became interested in coal mining. A number of daguerreotypes of Thomas, a man with deep-set eyes, a severe visage, and a rigid posture that conveyed both nobility and an uncompromising temperament, were found in the Historical Society's records. He was characterized by his careful habits, limited vocabulary, and extreme privacy, which in his later years verged on reclusiveness by those who wrote about him. Shortly after Thomas finished the main house in the spring of 1824, work on the Sutherland well started. Thomas sent in a crew of laborers from Philadelphia, men who knew little English and stayed to themselves during their 6-month stay, in contrast to other settlers who used local well diggers. Thomas personally oversaw the excavation, frequently going down into the expanding hole to check the progress, according to the record of Reverend Isaac Moore, who periodically visited the farm during this time. The diggers only worked at night, ostensibly to avoid the summer heat, but this habit persisted well into the cooler autumn months, as the Reverend observed with great anxiety. When the well was finished in November 1824, it was a feat of engineering for its day, with smooth brick walls that descended to a depth of more than 100 feet, according to local tales. Although a local shopkeeper noted in his ledger that only 4 of the original 6 men left, Thomas paid his imported workers handsomely and arranged for their return to Philadelphia. There's no evidence that these men ever settled further in Kentucky or the surrounding states, but when asked about this disparity, Thomas reportedly responded that 2 had decided to seek opportunities farther west. Throughout its existence, The Sutherland household relied on the well for water until the fall of 1893, although there were sporadic reports of its peculiar characteristics. In letters and diaries, a number of visitors to the Sutherland residence mentioned that the water tasted like a strange mineral and that Thomas insisted it had therapeutic qualities. Perhaps more significant were the remarks made by Clara Wilkins, the elderly housekeeper, who informed Sheriff Holloway that despite Thomas and his son's assertions about the well's unique features, they would never drink from it. The family only used the well water for laundry and other home chores, importing drinking water from a spring a few miles away. According to Sheriff Holloway's records, Elizabeth Sutherland was a smartly educated woman with a calm manner. She was married into the Sutherland family in 1882, having been born into a banking family in Louisville. Although people familiar with the family pointed out an odd bond between Elizabeth and her husband's twin brother Thaddeus, the union had, by all accounts, been a respectable one. Elizabeth was known to exit any place that Thaddeus entered, and they were hardly ever seen speaking to each other directly. In response to a query concerning the brothers' connection, Elizabeth used the odd phrase, appropriate and businesslike, which Sheriff Holloway emphasized twice in his notes. As the years went by, local rumors circulated that Ezekiel and Elizabeth's marriage had failed to bear any children. In a private letter to a medical colleague that was found among his belongings after his passing, Dr. Wilson implied that Elizabeth had sought his advice regarding chronic migraines and sleeplessness that started soon after her marriage. She had reportedly revealed at one of these consultations that Ezekiel required they sleep with their bedroom door shut from the outside, which he said was a family custom to stop sleepwalking. Despite his doubts about this theory, Dr. Wilson was only able to prescribe laudanum to treat her symptoms. Born in 1856, the Sutherland twins attended esteemed Eastern schools before coming back to Kentucky in 1877 to work for their father. Despite having the same look, they had very different temperaments. Business associates characterized Ezekiel, who was 17 minutes older than him, as ambitious and calculating, with a sharp eye for numbers and a startling ability to predict market movements. In contrast, Thaddeus seemed more reclusive and learned, frequently visiting Louisville or Cincinnati to buy books for the family's vast library. According to local stories, Thaddeus was in charge of the upkeep of the property, including the notorious well, while Ezekiel oversaw the family's mining operations and finances. In 1893, the Sutherland residence also featured 4 servants, a housekeeper named Sarah Bennington, a groundskeeper named Joseph Miller, and an elderly couple named Martin and Clara Wilkins, who had worked for the family for many years. According to the statements given by all, the brothers had left early on December 15th, wearing their bulky winter coats and carrying surveying equipment. Nobody mentioned anything out of the ordinary about the brothers' behavior that morning, but there was one aspect in Sarah Bennington's statement that would turn out to be important. 2 weeks earlier, she said, she had heard the brothers arguing angrily in the library. The family well, which had been covered with a thick wooden cover earlier that fall, seemed to be the topic. Sarah said that Ezekiel had demanded that something must be dealt with properly, but Thaddeus had emphasized that what's done is done. Other strange events at the Sutherland property occurred at the same time as this argument. In early November, groundskeeper Joseph Miller stated that he had received instructions to stay away from the area surrounding the well after nightfall. Ezekiel told him that the ground had become unstable and could collapse when he questioned this command. However, on a number of mornings, Miller observed disturbed foliage and fresh soil surrounding the well, indicating that the apparently hazardous area was active at night. Clara Wilkins's observation that lye and laundry soap had started to disappear in unusual numbers from the domestic stores, combined with multiple lengths of new rope that she had bought from the Henderson General Store, was the most telling. The well itself was unique in both its construction and its estimated depth of more than 100 feet. The Sutherland well had a smooth brick lining that was painstakingly built all the way to the bottom, in contrast to the majority of wells in the area that were lined with stacked stone. County records show that Thomas Sutherland had spent a lot of money importing special bricks from Philadelphia for this use. Before the family unexpectedly ceased using the well in September 1893, saying the water had become contaminated, the well had supplied water for the property. The original well was sealed with a specially crafted wooden lid, strengthened with iron bands, and fastened with a thick padlock, while a new, shallower well was rapidly dug nearer the home. Following a visit from Professor Harold Jenkins of the Kentucky Geological Survey, who had been surveying the area's groundwater supplies, the decision was made to seal the well. The survey archives contain the professor's field notes, which indicate that he had indicated interest in investigating the Sutherland well's remarkable depth. Thaddeus respectfully but resolutely rejected his proposal, citing structural stability concerns. In his journal, the professor described this refusal as peculiar and somewhat suspicious, but as he had the official power to demand it, he carried out his survey elsewhere. The well was sealed 3 weeks later. Assuming the brothers had been involved in an accident while surveying, Sheriff Holloway's initial investigation concentrated on the Ohio River and its environs. After 2 fruitless days, focus returned to the Sutherland estate. Deputy James Harrison then noticed something odd about the area around the enclosed well. In spite of the recent snowfall, there seems to have been some disturbance in the vicinity of the well. Traces of what may have been blood were visible on the fresh snow, and boot prints led to and from the well. Elizabeth Sutherland grew very upset when asked about this and insisted that the well must stay locked since the water was tainted by hazardous fumes. Even Elizabeth's domestic servants thought Elizabeth was overly worried about the well. She had started checking the well cover every night before going to bed, something Thaddeus used to do, according to Martin Wilkins' statement to Sheriff Holloway. At one point, he had seen her putting more locks on the cover, locks to which, as far as he knew, she alone had the keys. When Martin asked about this precaution, Elizabeth allegedly said, "Some things must remain buried, Mr. Wilkins, for all our sakes." Judge Carlton Miller granted Sheriff Holloway authority to shatter the well's seal on December 22, 7 days after the brothers vanished. 3 distinct documents provide an account of what transpired. Sheriff Holloway's official report, a letter from the county physician present, Dr. Henry Wilson, and Deputy Harrison's sealed deposition, which was kept under wraps until 1962. These reports state that when the well cover was removed, a strong, instantaneous stench was discovered, which made a number of the men there violently unwell. Dr. Wilson characterized it as, "Unlike any natural decay I have encountered in my medical practice, something altogether more chemical in nature, with undertones of metal and organic rot." The water level was abnormally low, revealing several feet of the brick lining that would typically have been submerged when lights were lowered into the well. Using a system of ropes and a bosun's chair that was borrowed from the riverboat port, the recovery team, which included Deputy Harrison and 2 local volunteers, descended. At about 80 feet down, we observed a disruption in the brick pattern of the well lining. Several bricks had been removed and placed aside with methodical care, revealing a small chamber carved into the earth behind the well wall. Within this chamber, we discovered human remains. Harrison wrote in his sealed deposition, describing their findings in clinical, almost detached language. Harrison's story goes on with more specificity than the official report did. The chamber had been meticulously excavated and strengthened, with wooden supports measuring about 6 feet deep by 4 feet wide. Tool traces on the earthen walls indicated that it had undergone several expansions over a long period of time. Harrison's discovery that the chamber included preserved soft tissue in addition to bones, which Dr. Wilson later hypothesized was the result of a mixture of chemical preservatives and mineral-rich groundwater, was the most unsettling. The bodies were in an advanced condition of decomposition, indicating they had been there for far more than 7 days, according to the official report. They belonged to at least 3 people, according to Dr. Wilson's initial assessment, but the condition prevented prompt identification. The investigation's focus shifted from a missing persons case to something more darker as a result of this discovery. Several personal belongings were found in the hidden chamber, including a gold pocket watch bearing the letters T.S., which was likely owned by Thomas Sutherland, who passed away in 1868. A woman's locket with a dark hair strand, and, most unsettling of all, a leather-bound journal. This journal seems to have belonged to Thaddeus Sutherland, but it was partially destroyed by the circumstances in the well. From 1880 to 1892, The readable entries depicted the dynamics of the Sutherland family in a troubling way. Today I discovered what Father has kept hidden beneath our home. God help me. I cannot unsee it, yet I cannot speak of it, not even to E, who would surely think me mad, or worse, complicit. The journal's opening entry, dated June 12, 1880, detailed Thaddeus's developing obsession with the well and its secrets, including his covert excavations to ascertain the full extent of the hidden chambers. Sheriff Holloway's report stated that the journal implied that Thaddeus had unintentionally found the secret compartment in 1880 when examining the well after a drought had caused the water level to drop. He suspected that his father had used the well to get rid of business rivals or those who had betrayed him, because of what he discovered there. The bones of people who seemed to have vanished from the adjacent town of Henderson during Thomas Sutherland's lifetime. Over time, Thaddeus's journal writings grew more suspicious as he expressed concern that his brother Ezekiel had learned about the chamber and was keeping tabs on him. In March 1888, there was an especially concerning entry that said, E has begun to speak of Father's practical solutions to business problems. He references events that occurred before our return from school, details he should not know unless he too has found the chamber. I fear he sees not horror, but opportunity in Father's legacy. This entry was made at a time when some of Ezekiel's business rivals suffered setbacks, but none of them completely vanished, which led Sheriff Holloway to conclude that, although Ezekiel may have admired his father's strategies, he had not necessarily adopted them. When the family abruptly decided to stop using the well because of alleged contamination, the last readable entry, dated September 3, 1893, simply said, E knows. The well must be sealed immediately. He suggests a more permanent solution, but I cannot bear it. There must be another way. Now there was a new dimension to the hunt for the brothers. Where were Ezekiel and Thaddeus if the remains in the well existed before they vanished? A more thorough investigation of the land was planned, with special attention paid to the large root cellar underneath the main house and a number of abandoned outbuildings. Another unsettling finding was uncovered in one of these, a smokehouse that was situated at the edge of the woods behind the property. Undisturbed snow and ice coated the facade of the smokehouse, a sturdy stone building with a single iron door that looked as if it had been there for months. Officers discovered indications of recent activity. Nevertheless, as they forced the corroded door open, there were traces of recent disturbance and repackaging on the dirt floor. The body of a man, whom Elizabeth Sutherland recognized as her husband Ezekiel, was discovered in this region when it was excavated to a depth of around 3 feet. A single wound to the back of the head, consistent with a mining pick or similar instrument, seemed to be the cause of death. After Ezekiel's body was found, the smokehouse and its surrounds were subjected to a more thorough investigation. Officers discovered a small metal box with personal documents, including many letters from people in Louisville and Cincinnati to Ezekiel, hidden behind a loose stone in the wall. These letters, which were written between 1891 and 1893, talked about unique specimens and special acquisitions that Ezekiel had reportedly been gathering. In one letter, Dr. Marcus Graves of Cincinnati stated that he was especially interested in anatomical curiosities of the sort you previously supplied, and that a sizable amount had been sent into Ezekiel's Cincinnati bank account. These findings raised the unsettling possibility that Ezekiel had not only been aware of his father's actions, but had also managed to make money off of them, maybe by selling relics or bones to dishonest researchers or medical collectors. When investigators found financial documents that showed significant deposits to Ezekiel's accounts that did not match the family's legal business endeavors, this notion gained support. No sign of Thaddeus Sutherland was discovered. Several riverboat captains reported that a single guy who fit his description had purchased passage to New Orleans in the days after December 15th, which coincided with his disappearance. It was unknown if Thaddeus had run away after murdering his brother, or if the fates of both brothers were due to someone else. Though there was no concrete proof beyond the dates and the journal entries, Sheriff Holloway's final report came to the conclusion that Ezekiel had most likely been killed by Thaddeus after a disagreement over the family's sinister secrets. It was later established that the human remains discovered in the well's secret chamber belonged to a minimum of 7 people. Only 2 were ever recognized because of their condition and the rudimentary forensic tools available at the time. Margaret Holloway, a Henderson young woman who went missing in 1851, and Thomas Reed, a financial rival of Thomas Sutherland, who had gone missing in 1842, though local rumors indicated she may have been involved with either Thomas Sutherland or his eldest son, not the twins, who would have been children at the time. It was unclear how Margaret Holloway was related to the Sutherland family. When Margaret Holloway went missing, her case had been especially enigmatic. She was a well-respected merchant's daughter, who was last seen making her way home from a social event at Henderson Church. Although investigations at the time had turned up no more clues, her parasol was later discovered close to the road that led to the Sutherland property. Distressed by her abduction, her father had offered a sizable reward for information, but no solid leads surfaced. The issue of what happened to her was solved when her remains were found in the Sutherland well over 40 years later, but the question of why was left unanswered. Those who knew local history were less surprised to learn that Thomas Reed was identified. In 1842, Reed reportedly left the area and abruptly abandoned his business while building a rival coal mining enterprise. Shortly after Reed's disappearance, Thomas Sutherland purchased Reed's mining rights at a fraction of their value, according to documents discovered among his papers after his death in 1868. Reed's financial troubles were first blamed for this, but the well's discovery gave the transaction a dark new dimension. Elizabeth Sutherland sold the property after these revelations and relocated to Chicago, where she remained until her passing in 1931. The Whitaker family bought the Sutherland house in 1901 after it had been unoccupied for a number of years. Curiously, the new owners filled in the infamous well entirely, covering its opening with concrete and building a stone plaque that still stands today, despite the fact that its writing has deteriorated to the point of being unreadable. Although census data show Elizabeth never remarried and led a humble life despite inheriting the sizable Sutherland wealth, nothing is known about her life in Chicago. In 1924, a nephew who paid her a visit wrote that she was a woman haunted by something beyond grief, a knowledge that has hollowed her from within. The same letter also claims that Elizabeth had a strange habit that persisted into her later years. She refused to live in any building with a cellar or basement and would never permit herself to be in a room with only one exit. If not for a strange discovery found in New Orleans in 1912, the case would have stayed closed. Workers found a secret area beneath the floorboards of a second-floor room while renovating a boarding house in the French Quarter. Among the personal belongings were a silver-handled walking stick bearing the letters T.S. and a journal that seemed to be an extension of the one discovered in the Sutherland well. According to reports, Thaddeus Sutherland's story of his escape from Kentucky and his life in Louisiana under a false identity was published in this magazine, which is currently housed in the University of Kentucky's Special Collections, though access is still limited. From 1894 until 1910, a man known locally as Theodore Smith, a quiet, erudite man who occasionally lectured on geology at Tulane University, ran the boarding house where these things were discovered. According to reports, Smith passed away from yellow fever in 1911, leaving no surviving family members. Smith's identity, as Thaddeus Sutherland, living under a false identity, was strongly implied by the discovery of the secret notebook and other Sutherland artifacts. Although Smith seems much older and more worn out than Thaddeus would have been at the time, photos of him that have survived in the Tulane archives bear a remarkable resemblance to the Sutherland twins. Thaddeus asserted that the altercation with his brother took place after Ezekiel suggested utilizing the well's secret chamber to get rid of Elizabeth, whom he had come to despise. According to academics who have been given restricted access to this paper, despite being aware of the family's troubled past, Thaddeus was unable to tolerate his sister-in-law's murder. Thaddeus claims that Ezekiel's death from the ensuing struggle was an act of urgent self-defense and protection for Elizabeth rather than premeditated murder. Thaddeus's choice to hide his brother's body in the smokehouse rather than the well is described in graphic detail in the journal. I could not bear to place him among father's victims, though perhaps that would be fitting. Instead, I laid him in the cold earth as our mother would have wished. This passage implies a complicated relationship between the twins, a mix of obligation, resentment, and enduring familial ties that remained despite the horrifying secrets they shared. Thaddeus's assertion that he was not the first Sutherland to escape due to the well is arguably the most terrifying. He stated that his mother, Catherine Sutherland, had fled to Europe after learning of her husband's actions and had not passed away from a fever in 1863 as the family had claimed. Catherine Sutherland, born Catherine Marsh of Virginia, had married Thomas Sutherland in 1822, and Thaddeus claims that she had written to him alone of her children, cautioning him to beware the depths beneath the house, for your father has made it a gateway to hell itself. According to historical accounts, she gave birth to 3 sons for him, William in 1823, and the twins, Ezekiel and Thaddeus, in 1856. Although there are no records of any other offspring, the considerable time between William and the twins raises the possibility that other pregnancies took place. Although Thaddeus's journal challenges this official version, Catherine is said to have died of fever the next year, and William had died during the Civil War in 1862. No evidence of Catherine Sutherland's escape to Europe can be found in immigration or passenger manifests. In September 1863, however, a woman who fits her description is listed in the guest book of a tiny hotel in Geneva, Switzerland, using her maiden name, Mrs. Catherine Marsh. According to the registration, she paid with U.S. gold dollars and was traveling alone. Swiss archives include no additional information about this woman, indicating that she either swiftly moved on or took on a new identity. Historians are particularly troubled by one paragraph in the New Orleans Journal, with such detailed detail that some researchers have questioned his mental health in his later years. Thaddeus wrote of recurrent dreams in which he sank the well past its physical depth into chambers that could not exist in the natural world. His account of specimens that his father had purportedly gathered, not all of them fully human, which he claimed to have seen as a boy before being rushed out of his father's private study, is particularly noteworthy. Some scholars have pointed out similarities between Thaddeus's descriptions and some folk beliefs that were common in rural Kentucky during Thomas Sutherland's time, but most historians reject these sections as the result of trauma and remorse. The miners of the area, many of whom refused to work in certain shafts despite financial incentives, shared the belief that coal mines occasionally unearthed things best left buried, not just fossils, but entities that defied conventional categorization. New drilling was done in the region of the former Sutherland property in 1959 after a number of local wells ran dry during a drought that caused water tables to drop sharply throughout Henderson County. In the vicinity of the original Sutherland well, Kentucky Water Authority workers claimed that their equipment had come across an unexpected void some 90 feet below the surface. The existence of what seemed to be a system of tiny chambers radiating away from the central location was verified by contemporary ground-penetrating radar. Robert Thornton, the project's principal engineer, provided a thorough study outlining irregularities in the soil composition around these chambers. Thornton was unable to easily identify the strange mineral deposits and chemical substances found in soil samples with the technologies available in 1959. More troubling was his observation of unusual patterns in the chamber walls that appeared too regular to be natural formations, but did not match known construction methods of the 19th century. His superiors refused to provide an explanation for their decision to reject his request for additional research and more advanced analysis. Citing safety concerns, the county commissioners refused to approve additional research. Subsequent construction projects were instructed to avoid excavating deeper than 20 feet in the vicinity of the area, which was designated as unsuitable for water drilling. A 1,968 attempt by a local historian to obtain authorization for an archaeological study of the site was met with extraordinary speedy denial, and county papers pertaining to the matter were suddenly misplaced soon after his inquiry. In his later private correspondence, that historian, Professor James Thornton, who was unrelated to the engineer, stated that he thought the county's hesitation was due to a wish to prevent publicity that could damage Henderson's reputation rather than safety concerns. He pointed out that some of the panel members were descended from well-known families that had done business with the Sutherlands and could have been involved in any in-depth examination of the family's operations. Although there is no evidence to support this claim, the Commission's records demonstrate that, in contrast to most land use problems, talks about the Sutherland property were regularly held in closed sessions. The most recent update in this long-dormant case occurred in 1962 when a concealed compartment in the office that Sheriff Holloway had previously inhabited was discovered during a courthouse remodeling in Henderson. There was a sealed metal box inside with more Sutherland case documents, including a number of photos of the well chamber and its contents that had not been included in the official file. According to the analysis of these photos by forensic historians from the University of Kentucky, the chamber was a meticulously planned area that was constructed alongside the well rather than a naturally occurring creation that had been altered for evil reasons. This suggests that Thomas Sutherland had always planned for the well to fulfill its sinister function. These photos display very high-quality masonry with perfectly cut access ports that might be virtually invisible when not in use. Images of what seemed to be specialized instruments discovered inside the chamber are more unsettling. These are tools whose function the 1,893 investigators either did not comprehend or did not formally record. According to contemporary forensic specialists who have studied these images, they are compatible with the surgical tools of the time, albeit altered in ways that suggest uses other than healing. A letter written by Elizabeth Sutherland to Sheriff Holloway on the 3rd of January 1894, following the conclusion of the official investigation, was also one of these concealed documents. Elizabeth made the shocking assertion in this letter that neither Thaddeus nor Ezekiel had built the secret room or positioned the remains inside. Elizabeth claims that the chamber and its contents were independently discovered by both brothers, Ezekiel in 1878 and Thaddeus in 1880. For years, each brother kept his knowledge of the vault and its contents hidden from the other out of fear of being implicated in their father's crimes. In her letter, Elizabeth wrote, "The brothers were mirror images in appearance only. In character, they could not have been more different." Ezekiel saw in his father's actions a kind of terrible practicality, while Thaddeus was haunted by the moral weight of what lay beneath our home. She goes on to say, "When they finally spoke openly of it in my presence in the autumn of last year, I knew our family's peace was forever shattered." Ezekiel had started to see the well's hidden chambers as a blessing rather than a burden. Elizabeth was horrified by this development, writing, "I realized then that the man I had married was capable of seeing profit where others would see only abomination. In that moment, he became a stranger to me. It appears that he had contacted collectors of medical curiosities in Cincinnati and Louisville, offering to sell them specimens from what he called his father's collection." Elizabeth's assertion that the bodies discovered in the well chamber were only a portion of Thomas Sutherland's victims was possibly the most unsettling. While the brothers were away on business in 1885, she claimed to have found evidence of similar chambers beneath the main house itself during a time of refurbishment. Some secrets, once unearthed, poison all they touch. She concluded her letter by pleading with Sheriff Holloway to keep this knowledge private so that the dead rest and those of us who remain live without the shadow of Thomas Sutherland's legacy. There was never any formal investigation into Elizabeth's assertions that there were other chambers beneath the main house. The Sutherland house's architectural blueprints, which are kept in the county records, display standard foundations devoid of any distinctive elements. But no such alternative designs have ever been discovered, but a remark in the margin of these drawings, written in Thomas Sutherland's hand, refers to alternate specifications to be implemented by trusted laborers only. No additional investigation of the Sutherland home was carried out while Sheriff Holloway was in office, suggesting that he complied with Elizabeth's request. It is uncertain if Elizabeth's assertions were communicated to his successors. The Sutherland home itself remained intact until 1943, when an inexplicable fire destroyed it. Since then, the site has remained undeveloped, going through several owners who have farmed the land while keeping the immediate vicinity of the house and well unaltered. The Henderson County Fire Department conducted an investigation into the fire that destroyed the residence and came to the conclusion that lightning was most likely the cause. An adjacent farmer's statement, however, runs counter to this conclusion. The night before the fire, Jacob Miller, whose farm bordered the Sutherland property, reported seeing lights moving within the deserted house. Because of the old farmer's penchant for fantastic tales, Miller's assertion was taken notice of but eventually disregarded. There is no doubt that the fire started in the basement and spread remarkably quickly, devouring the entire building before firefighters could arrive. Over the years, Henderson County local folklore has changed, with the Sutherland property serving as the backdrop for numerous ghost stories and tragedies. Perhaps what these stories fail to recognize is that the Sutherland case's real tragedy is not found in paranormal activity, but rather in people's all-too-human propensity for evil and deceit. Above a literal and symbolic chamber of horrors, 3 generations of a well-respected family lived, each member making their own decisions about what to know, what to conceal, and how to live with dreadful information. Although many farmers continue the custom of avoiding the local area where the house and well formerly stood, farmers who have farmed the ground surrounding the former Sutherland property report no odd occurrences. Only a single weathered stone that marks the location of the notorious well and a small depression where the foundation has settled remain to mark the area. When viewed from higher height, the former structure's shape can be seen due to the less dense vegetation in this area, a ghost of architecture left on the environment. The well, which is now mostly forgotten and filled with concrete, is nonetheless a mute reminder of these decisions. There is no sign of what is below, because the earth above it looks the same as the field around it. The most disturbing aspect of the Sutherland case is not what we know, but what remains hidden, not just physical evidence, but the psychological reality of how such secrets shape those who keep them. Professor James Thornton, a local historian who made an attempt to study the site in 1968, expressed his interest in the case in a way that went beyond academic circles. According to county records, Elizabeth Sutherland was friends with his maternal grandmother Emily Harrison as a child before she married into the family. Several letters from Emily to her daughter, Thornton's mother, expressing concern about Elizabeth's growing isolation after joining the Sutherland household, were among the family communications discovered among Thornton's belongings following his death in 1992. In a particular letter from 1888, Emily wrote, "I barely recognized my dear friend when I called upon her yesterday. She moved through that great house like a ghost, watching the shadows as if they might reach for her. When I asked after her health, she said only, 'This house has depths, Emily, depths no one should plumb.'" Finally, and perhaps fittingly, the property was bought in 1967 by Elizabeth Sutherland's great-granddaughter, the last known descendant of the Sutherland line. County records show that she never visited the property or even constructed on it. This descendant, Margaret Wilson of Chicago, was the granddaughter of Elizabeth's nephew who had visited her in 1924. When questioned by a local newspaper about why she had purchased the property, she simply responded, "Some doors need to stay closed. My family closed this one long ago, and I intend to keep it that way." Wilson's own story, which was published in a small literary journal in 1975, states that her great-aunt had gotten her grandson to swear that the family would never forget what lies beneath. This mysterious directive, which had been passed down through the generations, led to Wilson buying the land expressly to stop it from being developed. Wilson created a trust with strong restrictions on building and excavation in order to preserve land ownership in perpetuity. Notwithstanding the tidbits of information that have surfaced over the years, the Sutherland well is still hidden beneath earth and concrete layers, its mysteries essentially unaltered. The whole truth of what happened on that Henderson County property may never be revealed, as is the case with many historical situations. There is no doubt that the Sutherland family's honorable exterior belied depths that few could fathom and that eventually destroyed them. Since the last formal investigation of the site in 1959, archaeological methods have significantly improved, without damaging whatever is still sealed beneath the surface. Non-invasive techniques like soil composition analysis and ground-penetrating radar may be able to provide a wealth of information about the well and any associated structures. The conditions of Margaret Wilson's trust, however, expressly forbid such studies, and researchers' attempts to contest these limitations in court have repeatedly been unsuccessful. Thaddeus Sutherland's ultimate destiny is as unknown as the reasons behind his family's behavior. I dream of the well almost nightly now, not as it was, but as it might become. The bricks shift and reform, creating new passages, new chambers. I wonder sometimes if what Father built was not meant merely to hide the dead, but to house something else entirely, something that still waits, patient as the earth itself, for someone to descend those depths again. The journal discovered in New Orleans ends abruptly in 1911 with this intriguing entry. The handwriting in these final passages differs slightly from earlier entries, becoming more erratic and pressed deeply into the paper, suggesting either great agitation or physical deterioration of the writer. According to forensic graphologists who have studied facsimiles of the journal, Thaddeus might have been experiencing neurological decline in his last years, which could have been made worse by exposure to toxins, which is a common risk associated with coal mining and the preservation techniques used at the time. One of the personal belongings discovered with the notebook was a little glass vial filled with soil samples that were meticulously documented with geological notations and depth readings. When Tulane University researchers analyzed these samples in 1968, they found peculiar mineral compositions that were in line with the depths of the coal mining operations in Sutherland. Trace elements that were difficult for the researchers to identify were more perplexing. One geologist called these compounds theoretically impossible, given our current understanding of Kentucky's geological history. It seems that Thaddeus Sutherland's, or Theodore Smith's, life in New Orleans was peaceful, but not totally solitary. In a statement to police following the discovery of his hidden cache, his boarding house landlady, widow Marie Laveau, no relation to the well-known voodoo practitioner of the same name, described him as a gentleman of refined habits but troubled sleep, who would often walk the hallways at night as if searching for something he had lost. Several students who attended his lectures noted his particular interest in underground structures and what he called anomalous formations, geological features that defied easy classification. Although he turned down offers of permanent professor positions, Tulane University records indicate that he periodically gave lectures on geology and mining engineering. According to one of these students, who went on to become a well-known geologist, Smith Sutherland once brought a rock sample to class that he said originated from a depth where such material should not exist. When the student asked Smith to clarify, Smith allegedly became evasive and quickly changed the topic. Due to their sensitive nature, many of the records in the Henderson County Historical Society's modest collection about the Sutherland case are restricted. A fascinating phenomena is frequently seen by researchers who have studied these materials. Although the official records include accurate measurements, dates, and factual explanations, they don't really capture the psychological realities of those involved. To do that, one needs examine the confidential letters, the unpublished diaries, and the gaps between known facts, the silences that reveal a great deal about the Sutherland family's decision to keep things quiet. A fragmentary transcript of an interview with Clara Wilkins in 1894, just before her death, is one of these limited materials. Having been employed by the Sutherland family since Thomas's day, the elderly servant talked about the changes she had seen in her employer over the years. When Clara first joined Thomas Sutherland's service in 1830, she described him as a strict but not cruel man. Clara recalled, "Mr. Sutherland spent 3 days down in that mine, would not let anyone else enter. When he came up, he was changed. His eyes had a look I cannot describe, like he had seen something not meant for seeing. He started the secret workings on the well that same week." She said that his metamorphosis started in 1836 when workers broke through into what they called a hollow space deep within the earth. Several miners reportedly refused to return to their positions, forfeiting significant wages rather than descend into that particular shaft again when work resumed 3 weeks later. This account is consistent with county records that indicate Thomas temporarily suspended operations in his primary mine in August 1836, citing the need for structural reinforcements. It is still unclear what Thomas Sutherland could have found in that mine. In the 1,950 seconds, Geological examinations of the area revealed peculiar structures in western Kentucky's coal seams, especially near the Sutherland mines. These formations featured fossilized features that were difficult to classify and mysterious spaces. In his private communication, the lead geologist, Dr. Raymond Carter, stated that several parts of the survey had been removed from the final report because state officials felt they were potentially misleading because of sampling errors. Ultimately, the history of the ominous brothers and their family is more than just a gruesome tale of murder and deception or a historical curiosity. It serves as a warning that, even in the most honorable of lives, there may be hidden depths and secret rooms that are impossible to fully close once they are revealed. Above a literal and symbolic chamber of horrors, 3 generations of a well-respected family lived, each member making their own decisions about what to know, what to conceal, and how to live with dreadful information. Only the remains of the former Sutherland house and a lone weathered stone that commemorates the location of the notorious well remain on the now empty property, which is still a rolling grassland. The region is unusually quiet, according to visitors, as though the land itself is silently seeing what happened there. Because nothing grows well in such soil, local farmers steer clear of the area. Scientists blame this on anomalies in groundwater or mineral deposits, but historians question whether certain stains go deeper than examination can reveal. When a team from the University of Kentucky secretly studied the Sutherland property in 1997 under the pretense of conducting broad environmental studies, they discovered something surprising. Traces of chemicals commonly linked to 19th century embalming techniques were found in soil samples collected from the property's border, which was as near as researchers could legally get to the well site. Isotope ratios in groundwater samples were even more perplexing, indicating that the water in the region had been cut off from the regular hydrological cycle for abnormally extended periods of time, as though it had been confined in sealed chambers beneath the ground. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the principal investigator, tried to publish these results in a geological journal, but her proposal was turned down without being reviewed. She asked her department chair about this unusual treatment, and she was told that further investigation of the Sutherland property was not in the university's interests at this time. Montgomery quit her job soon after, and she hasn't been interviewed about her research. As a result, the Sutherland case is still partially exposed and somewhat hidden, a shadow from Kentucky's history that persists in the present. The most unsettling cases, according to those who study such historical mysteries, are not those that involve supernatural elements or excessive gore, but rather those that demonstrate how common people can put up with extraordinary evil to live with it, to work around it, to act as though it doesn't exist even as it festers beneath their feet. In this way, the ominous brothers' actual terror might not be found in what they found, but rather in how long it took them to face it. One of the main themes in the Sutherland story is the psychological effects of inherited secrets. The ways in which Elizabeth, Ezekiel, and Thaddeus reacted to learning what was beneath their house ultimately dictated their respective outcomes. Ezekiel tried exploitation, Elizabeth opted for escape, and Thaddeus vacillated between exposure and hiding before acting directly. Every decision had ramifications that extended to subsequent generations. What she called geographic trauma, the psychological effects of residing in areas connected to past atrocities, was the subject of a 2003 thesis proposal by a psychology PhD student at Vanderbilt University. She chronicled the stories of those who had worked on or around the property over the decades, using the Sutherland case as one of her main examples. Her research revealed a pattern of minor but quantifiable psychological effects that persons who had no prior knowledge of the site's history felt, ranging from sleep difficulties to unexplained anxiousness. The incomplete data is still of interest to scholars who investigate the relationship between history, psychology, and location, but the university's ethics committee stopped the study before it was finished due to concerns about participant welfare. Though rarely by that name, the Sutherland well narrative has occasionally appeared in popular culture. A movie called The Depths from 1972 was based mostly on the case, however it was set in a fictional New England setting. A small-scale podcast series that looked closely at the historical record was launched more recently, but the creators gave up after 3 episodes, claiming difficulties with research access and unusual technical problems when they tried to visit Henderson County. The Sutherland case is in an awkward limbo for Henderson County citizens, too important to completely forget, but too upsetting to be included in the county's official history. Despite the Sutherlands' prominence in local commerce for almost 70 years, neither the family nor their well are mentioned in the county museum. When questioned about this omission, the museum curator allegedly said that some aspects of local history belong to the past and should remain there. However, the past tends to come back, especially when conscious attempts are made to bury it. Workers discovered a sealed metal container buried next to what looked to be the remnants of an old carriage path in 2012, while building a new highway a few kilometers from the Sutherland property. A set of daguerreotypes of the Sutherland residence and its residents around 1,850 were found within. The most striking of these was a photograph of Thomas Sutherland standing next to the well, his hand resting on its stone rim in what one art historian called a gesture of unsettling intimacy, the way one might touch a valued possession or even a beloved pet. The photographs were on display at the Henderson County Library for a short time before being taken down at the request of county officials. Although copies are said to exist in private collections, their present location is unknown. When a Smithsonian photography specialist examined one of these copies, he found curious anomalies in the background, which seemed to be differences in perspective and shadow that could be signs of plate manipulation. It is unknown if these irregularities are the result of intentional editing or just the constraints of early photographic technology. As we wrap off this narrative, ask yourself, how many secrets are hidden beneath the familiar locations we know? How many locked chambers, floors, and walls hide facts that would alter our perceptions of the people and places we consider to be familiar? One such chamber from a single family in a single Kentucky county is the Sutherland Well. It begs the question of how many more are out there, waiting in the shadows for their secrets to come to light. I have traveled far from Kentucky, yet I cannot escape the well. It exists not merely in that place, but in my mind, a depth that cannot be filled with earth or concrete or the passage of years. Thaddeus wrote in his journal in New Orleans. I sometimes wonder if all families have such wells, places where the unspeakable is stored, covered over, but never truly gone. Perhaps what makes the Sutherlands unique is not the existence of our well, but simply that ours had physical form. There is hardly much left to identify the location of this troubling past for anyone interested in visiting Henderson County today. The Sutherland property is located on private property that is not shown on local maps and is not open to the public. This may be appropriate. A tale of secret depths should, in part, remain secret, accessible only through shards of documents and recollections that become increasingly shaky with time. However, the tale endures, handed down through Henderson County residents' generations, serving as a warning about the perils of going too far into the dark. When interviewed for this story, an elderly local said, "Some things are buried for a reason. The Sutherland, well, that's not just dirt and concrete down there. That's a choice our grandparents made to put something away that shouldn't see daylight, and I reckon we ought to respect that choice." Every listener must decide for themselves whether or not this respect equates to wisdom or complicity. One thing is certain, though, something that changed everyone who came into contact with it, from Thomas Sutherland to modern researchers, lies hidden beneath the undulating fields of Henderson County, Kentucky. Something that persists in influencing people who approach its story and pulls them farther into its enigmatic depths in spite of all containment measures.